Hello everybody, Devin here again, and this is for all the people that I said I wasn't going to do any World War II helmets, and this really isn't a World War II helmet, but it's also really pretty much a World War II helmet, because they didn't frickin' change them. So we'll get into it, though. For all you people that want to see a World War II helmet, or an American helmet, or anything like that, we can get into that. Right now with this video, and I'm not going to do another World War II helmet for a while, probably, even at people's requests, unless I come up with one that has a specific provenance with it that makes it more rare or more interesting, because there's millions of other videos out there on YouTube on all of these, on all the World War II helmets, because they're the most popular. But this one you see in front of you is an M1, and it's probably America's most iconic helmet ever. Now the one in front of you is actually an American shell and a Canadian liner. The Canadian liner is the same as the Vietnam ones, alright? But we'll get into the history of this helmet before we talk about this exact helmet itself. We'll get into the history behind it. Now, the M1 was approved for service in 1941 to replace the M1917A1 Kelly helmet, which the shell had been used since World War I. So it had been in service now for a little over 20 years, and it was just a very, very outdated design. Stuff was coming along very rapidly. And at first, the M1 helmet shared a lot of the same parts as the Kelly helmet. Now, the Kelly helmet is made out of a very high chromium or manganese content steel. They were initially made out of the same gauge as steel. They had the same kind of chin strap in the OD number 3, which is actually brown. And they had all brass hardware. All the early ones had brass J-hooks, as they're called. Black and brass J-hooks and buckles like this, as well as brass end keepers. And later they went to white metal end keepers, so like steel end keepers and stuff like that, and hooks. And there's a couple different hook designs and everything like that. And just for cost-effective reasons, because brass was a commodity, they needed that to make ammo. So, but the M1 steel helmet came out in 1941 to replace the Kelly, and it was a huge improvement. Now this shell here is just to show you what it looks like without the cover, but it came out in 1941 to replace the Kelly, and it didn't fully replace the Kelly until 1942. And the early M1 helmets had a lot to be desired from them. They offered good more coverage than the M1917A1, but they at first had a lot of problems. Like most of the U.S. military technology to come out, at first they had a fuck ton of problems. The first liners in them were low pressure liners. They were essentially paper mache. So imagine you're a Marine getting sent out to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, wearing a paper mache helmet in the hot 120 degree humidity. It essentially fell apart around you, and then all you were left with was a steel shell, and that was no good. So they realized there's a lot of problems early on with those, and they started coming out with high pressure liners. The very last low pressure liners were made in November of 1942, and then after that they were all high pressure liners, and those were made out of fiberglass or compressed canvas, or what's known as Corlon. It's like canvas and resin. And later ones, even like towards the 70s and 80s, like late 70s, early 80s, started to be made out of Kevlar and other types of ballistic fabric, because it offered more better deformation pattern if the bullet didn't penetrate the helmet. So, or piece of shrapnel or whatever, it offered a little bit more protection. It still wouldn't stop a bullet head on. Now, no helmet is designed to be bulletproof. These things would not stop most handgun rounds head on. They'd go right through them, right into your head. Probably wouldn't go through both sides of the helmet, but if one came in the side, and it'd go in and not completely out. But the weakest point of these helmets is right above the temple area. Right here, most helmets, it's right at the temple area, because it's just where the most vertical wall is of the helmet, or there's usually a change in direction of the pattern there as far as Kevlar ones go. So, but this helmet was made almost entirely round, and now the first helmets were front seamed, which means this little rim that is around it. See that kind of little lip there, that rim? It means that the early ones were seamed here in the front, but that tended to catch and like cut people's hands when you would grab the brim of the helmet. They would cut you, so they moved that to the rear of the helmet on later designs. And earlier helmets had, let me take a look at this one, had fixed bails, which means you see that kind of green thing in there? How it moves back and forth on a fixed bail helmet. So the early ones was just a piece of like wire, like steel wire that was bent and welded. It was pinch welded right to the shell, and they tended to break off. So they went to a swivel bail, so one that moves back and forth, and that improved the longevity a lot more. And they came with tons of different liners. There's tons of famous, like most of the early liners were made by Holley or Holley's subcontractors. So all the like paper mache low pressure liners, which are really thick. Whereas you see, I'll show you later, the thin, high pressure liners. A lot of them were made by like Seaman Paper Company made them. Firestone Tire Company made them. MSA made them. There's just tons and tons and tons of companies out there. And the helmet pretty much made most of its changes during World War II, and the M1 served on through the mid and end of World War II, all the way through Korea and Vietnam and into the modern era, right up to when the U.S. Invaded Grenada. Was the first time we used the Kevlar PAS-GT helmet, and that was in 1986, I want to say. So I could be wrong on that. I'm not sure. I don't have any notes right here in front of me. I'm doing this all from memory. But we'll move on here now to the Vietnam helmets were the first ones to really make changes to it, all right? Because in World War II, there was pretty much all the same cotton webbing in it and everything like that. And in Vietnam, they switched to kind of a nylon blended cotton fabric. The earliest ones had rayon, and that tended to disintegrate. And later you'll see full nylon helmets, and this helmet was actually so iconic and everything, it actually went on to be adopted by almost every NATO country, and it's actually still NATO's standard helmet. They haven't adopted a single composite design to replace it. So this helmet is still in use with a lot of countries, and a lot of countries only recently just got rid of it. Like Japan used their version of the M1 until 2012, I think it was. South Korea still uses the M1. Turkey still uses the M1 as their standard helmet. Pretty much every country in Europe adopted these to some point, or something very close to it. Even Russia went, after World War II, went so far as to test it. This helmet is probably one of the most iconic shapes of any helmet out there in the world, other than the Stahlhelm, obviously. But this helmet is pretty much the representation of the free world. So, and the Vietnam ones went to a darker color liner, blended fabric, and it had, most of them had high pressure liners made out of fiberglass, and they were all looked like this on the inside. Where you can see it's kind of this dark olive drab. It's kind of a gray green instead of like the late World War II ones used like a dark green. You could actually see the green. This is kind of like a gray green, and all the helmet sweatbands were held in with little tension clips. And this is an airborne liner. You could tell by the A yokes on here, and the A yokes just made it a lot more stable, because the normal M1. The only chin strap on it is connected to the shell, but the airborne liners are all connected to the liner. And in the World War II, the liner was held in place by tension. If you had a cover on it, it would be enough to hold it in there, or there would be a leather leather chin strap that would rivet right up above your ear in the shell, and it would come out and around, and you hold it, tighten it over the bill of the helmet. This helmet doubles as like an original kind of multi-tool for military use, because even the World War II ones, you could pull the liner out. And then you had just a steel bucket, essentially, with the chin strap connected to the shell being like a handle. So you could use this to bail your foxhole. You could use it to cook out of, but that's not recommended because it'll ruin the temper on the steel. But people still did it. You could use it as a hammer to drive in tent stakes. You can use it as a shovel if you really need to do. Like if you're being shot at and you had to dig a hole, it's better than clawing your fingernails off in the dirt. So this helmet has been there and back. This one, like I said, is actually Canadian. This helmet liner is Canadian because Canada adopted the M1 helmet in the 70s to replace the Mark IIIs that they had been using from British service for a long time. America being their closest ally, they might as well take American stuff. And the cover on it is actually, it's not OD. It's brighter than that. It's Canadian Mass Green, which is like their version of olive drab. I like it better because it's a little brighter. Works better for where I live and stuff like that. But other than that, it's pretty much distinguishable from an olive drab one, or the like olive drab ones used in early Vietnam. And later they all went to the vine leaf reversible Mitchell pattern helmet covers that you've all seen. But early Vietnam, you'll see a lot of the olive drab green helmet covers, or the Marines had the reversible frog skin that you see in World War II. But Vietnam actually went on for a lot longer than people think. The U.S. had troops in Vietnam in 1955, just after the French left, because Vietnam was known as French Indochina before it was known as Vietnam, and the French had been fighting a revolution, trying to quell a revolution in Vietnam since 1945, and in like 1954 they gave up, and America came in to kind of start producing infrastructure there and protecting their own interests and stuff in that country. But Vietnam went on from 1955 to 1975. Fighting didn't really pick up until 1960, so we had troops there 5 years before any like cool stuff happened, or a lot of the stuff people know about happened. And this was pretty much the standard helmet for us in Vietnam. We also had other countries helping us, like Australia actually fought the entirety of the Vietnam War with us. People tend to forget about that. But Australia were actually our closest ally there in the Pacific that had experience fighting in jungle against the Japanese. So they were pretty much the jungle warfare masters as far as our close allies go to. So we turned to them in early Vietnam a lot for tactics to use in the jungle against the Viet Cong and the NVA regulars. Now, the NVA had their own helmet too. A lot of them were like the cork or fiber pith helmets, copied off of the French and a lot of Chinese surplus. You see, every now and then you'll see Vietnam soldiers wearing the East German kind of big sloped M59 helmet. You'll see them in some pictures wearing that. But a lot of times they would just wear cloth hats and stuff and everything to just blend in. That was their best aid there during the war, was to be able to be undistinguishable from the general populace, because the U.S. would never go in, being one of the Geneva Convention countries, one of the countries to sign the Geneva Convention. They wouldn't go in and just start killing women and children and everyone else like that, and that's how they knew they would win, because eventually, like now, everyone has found out how to beat the U.S. in a long-term war. Instead of having a large war, based on gaining ground or losing ground, Vietnam was the first war based on body count. So you can't trace on a map body count. You can't tell if you're winning by body count, especially against an enemy where you don't know his true fighting force. You don't know how many people there actually are, and the Vietnamese were very good at hiding this. After battles, they'd drag bodies off so we couldn't get accurate counts of casualties and stuff like that. But enough about the Vietnam War. We'll get into this helmet. This is the Vietnam era, same style. So it's got the A washers in it, riveted directly to the shell. You can't pull this out without popping out that little rivet. There's special tools to do that. I recommend you take it somewhere professional if you have one and you want to change everything. Take it somewhere professional, because you can easily fuck one of these up if you don't know what you're doing. Because the liners were meant to be just junked if something went wrong on them, and you would get a new one. Now you can tell this is different from the World War II ones, because the World War II ones, most of the A-washers were painted. So these ones are just blackened. So, and by this nape strap here, these were on only mid-war Vietnam and later. Or otherwise than that, they had the US type, like World War II type, where it would just be here in the back of the helmet. The head strap sat much higher up. The suspension sat much higher up, and there was a piece of cloth that went back here, and you would snap in a nape protector, whereas this is just routed through a slider buckle in the back and on the sides under where the outer shell chin strap connects to the inner shell chin strap. And that was pretty much the same on all the helmets after that. And another way you could tell the difference between the early ones and the later ones is the early ones didn't have this overlapping stripe type. They had triangle, like V-shaped pieces of webbing that would tie with a loop of string here at the top, and that's how you would adjust it. Whereas these ones all have slider buckles way there in the back, kind of hidden by the chin strap. You could kind of see it there. That piece of black right above the gray strap there. That's the easiest way to tell an early one from a late one. Also that there's no liner chin strap. There's no leather liner chin strap. And this helmet is great because it doubles as a construction helmet. If you don't want to wear the full steel helmet because this is heavy, you could take the liner out and wear just the liner. And a lot of soldiers did that when they were on duty, like working and stuff, where you still in felling trees for landing zones and things. They would wear just the liner because it's a lot lighter and it offered like blunt protection against tree branches falling on you and stuff. And it wasn't bulletproof, but it was better than carrying the full steel helmet on you. That would wear you out and fatigue you a lot faster than wearing just the liner. So you see a lot of generals and stuff in World War II wearing just the liner, and it would have their stars and stuff on it and their insignias painted on the side. It's not uncommon to find them with insignias and stuff painted on the side. Now, these were all painted in the same color, olive drab, number 7, okay? Which is kind of a darker olive drab. So it's kind of like this chin strap color here. So you saw the other one, it's kind of a green. What you would think of as green, whereas the webbing in like the early ones wasn't green, it was tan. Or as OD number 3 as they call it. And this is pretty much gonna wrap it up here as far as it goes. This helmet's been around for forever. You could spend a lifetime collecting just M1 helmets and variances of M1 helmets. I know of at least 100 different designs, and I'll probably do a video on a West German version later, which is my favorite version of the M1. It's the most comfortable and everything. You really can't go wrong, whereas I tend to shy away from the American ones as much because they're so common and there's already so much provenance behind them. It overshadows the other ones a lot more. So, but I hope this satisfied all you people that are looking to see a World War II helmet or a Korean helmet or a Vietnam helmet, because this is it. The shell was unchanged. The only thing that changed was the liner. All right. They pretty much all the shells that you see for M1s that was used from 1942 to 1986 or whatever, all of those M1 shells were made pre-1953. Okay, they remained unchanged. The chin straps changed, the colors changed a little bit, but other than that, it's the same helmet, and that's why it's so iconic. It was around for 3 wars. So we'll wrap it up here, and leave a like, leave a comment to show interest in this. Hopefully this satisfied all you people. This is kind of a longer video because I had to go in a lot of history and a lot of changes. This helmet, because its lifespan was literally so long and it's still used by tons of other countries. So suggest topics for future videos and everything else, or if you want to see anything else, leave a comment. If you have any additional information to help other people in the comments try to identify theirs, feel free to drop that in the comments. I'll try to kind of navigate stuff and answer questions as best I can. If you have any purposes as far as like stamps and markings go, feel free to ask me and I'll do my best to figure it out for you. Till then, I'll let you go and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.